Welcome to everyone who has joined us today, and we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is writing instruction or teaching writing and overcoming barriers to writing. So I will proceed and let you know what we're going to be talking about today. So first of all, I want what writing is actually, and then why is it so difficult? Why do so many students have challenges with writing? Is it, and what are the reasons for those challenges? Because writing is a very complicated process cognitively, and we want to understand what it is that can throw up barriers and how to break them down for our students. And we'll talk about what the research says about writing instruction. And we'll also talk particularly, kind of give an overview of what are the most important aspects of teaching writing to students who, particularly those who are at risk. And by at risk, I mean not just who may have a learning disability, but those who have had not a lot of writing instruction before, who have just not been successful with it before, and for various reasons may not have a lot of background in writing. So we will discuss that. And as we begin, I want to talk about how students feel about writing, because a lot of students would pretty much rather do almost anything than write. And so we're really, in some cases, especially students who are older and had a lot of failure in writing, we're really addressing a situation where students are feel very unsure of themselves and really kind of hate writing. So I'm going to read this to you because it may be hard to read on your end. But this is a student. I worked for some period of time at Landmark College in Putney, Vermont, and that's a small college for students with learning disabilities, attention deficits, and so on. And so we had a number of students who had language-based learning disabilities, but also lots of executive function challenges as well, which I'll be talking about. One of the first assignments that writing teachers would give at Landmark is to talk about their writing history. What have you done before? What do you like, and so on. This particular student wrote this particular response called a map home. All right, here is the situation. You are born. At an early age, you are taken from your home, late at night by burglars, or in the middle of the day by angels. You choose, does not matter. Bottom line, you are taken. You are left by the edge of the highway with nothing, no food, no water, no map, no idea how to find your way home. The plot now thickens. Not only do you not have a map to get yourself home, but you have no concept of directions and how they could help you. So even if someone told you which way was north, you would not even know what to do with the information. You would probably start walking in that direction, assuming it is the way to go, because it is the only thing you know. So what are you left to do but wander and starve and dream of the house you are desperately trying to find? You imagine the feeling this house could give you, but you're not even really sure what it looks like. This situation is how I feel about writing. Whoa. So, and I think this is actually not uncommon. This is a very, this student has, is very expressive here on this topic, but the way writing is taught in many places, students aren't really given a whole lot of direction. there's a lot of there's a whole school of thought that writing should just be this free form, just have students write and it will come and so on. And maybe you could give a little bit of support for grammar and so on. But what happens in this case is you have a whole lot of students who have absolutely no idea how to even begin to do an assignment, an essay, particularly maybe an informational essay or something like that. So one of the reasons that writing is so difficult is that we have what are called lower order and higher order processes that compete for cognitive working space. Now, what I mean by cognitive working space is I almost picture it sometimes picture it as a counter in a kitchen. So you've got this counter and that's there that gives you space, and you want to bake cookies, say. Well, you get out your equipment, mixer, cookie sheets, equipment to spoon the dough out of the and the ingredients that will go in the mixing bowl and so on. And you put them in, line them up, you put them in, you get the dough made, you spoon them out onto cookie sheets, you bake them, and you're done. Pretty much straightforward. And you've got room on this counter. But what if the counter is all cluttered with dirty dishes already? If the counter's cluttered, then you have to try to move those dishes away somehow and put them somewhere. And then on top of that, and the counter shop is probably dirty. And so maybe you have to clean all the dishes and wipe down the counters before you can even begin. And then you get your mixer out and your stuff. But by now you're tired of it all. And you think, why should I bother? Who needs cookies anyway? That's kind of the way cognitive working space is. So, or for those of you who want to compare it to how a computer works, cognitive working space is a little bit like RAM in a computer. And in old computers, you remember how, as I do, how you had too much stuff open on your computer and it would crash because it just couldn't manage to keep all those things together. Well, cognitive working space is similar to that. So when you're writing, you have to think about spelling and mechanics, and spelling, grammar, all the things that are that need to happen to make the writing legible and so on, handwriting or typing or however you're doing it. And then you also have to have a topic and sometimes a thesis, and you've got to put things in sentences that relate to your topic. So you've got a kind of a tug of rope going on between thinking about spelling and mechanics versus thinking about the ideas you want to express. And it will work out as long as you've got a sort of a balance. If you're automatic with spelling, grammar, you can use punctuation and and different sentence types without really thinking about it much. So you can really devote your time to developing your topic and your thesis and what you're going to see, the details that support that. Then it's okay. But if not, then you have some issues. So, you've got spelling on one side and analyzing or critical thinking on the other. And that's going to cut down somewhat on your cognitive working space. It's going to put clutter on your countertop. And then, so there are a number of things that will constrict or cut down available cognitive working space. One of them is if your memory or attention is weak, or you have trouble focusing or shifting, and the other kinds of planning, organization that's part of executive function. that lops off some of the cognitive working space, because then you have to spend a lot of time planning and thinking about and paying attention, and it's hard. Then if you have some language deficits, such as spelling, then again, or just even word retrieval, coming up with words to express yourself, then there goes another piece. If your skills, particularly your your ability to spell and write grammatical sentences and punctuate them and so on, then you have to pay a lot of attention to that, and that just pulls away from the ideas you want to express. And then, because of many of these other things, you may have a lot of anxiety or depression or other issues that have to do with social and emotional well-being. And then you have really limited, you've put lots of obstacles into your cognitive working space, which makes writing difficult, more challenging than it would be otherwise. So, on the other hand, things that will expand cognitive working space is if we can somehow deal with some of those barriers that constricted it. If skills are automatized, in other words, if reading and spelling is fairly automatic, then that's helpful. If you use strategies for writing, you have a strategy to guide you in planning and organization. That helps take away some of the difficulties that you might have that are due to executive function. And if you have confidence that eventually you will get through this, then that is another thing that will expand. So by using strategies and by breaking down the barriers that maybe some of those spelling and grammar skills, you can get some help with that, possibly through technology or mentoring or coaching or whatever that will help you, then you are much more likely to be successful. So we have executive function, which the most common, which is a complex. Our executive functions are located in the frontal and parietal areas of the brain, frontal being in front and the parietal somewhat on the side, that serves our central executive function area, that executive control area, that where working memory is located. The area that also helps us to have cognitive flexibility, in other words, the order to shift and rethink a plan or a topic or whatever, the ability to plan and prioritize, the ability to inhibit distractors or other things that will take you away from the actual task, and the emotional control to deal with some of those feelings of anxiety or self negative self-talk and so on that can be so difficult or so constricting. So working memory is very crucial to this process for all of us. Working memory actually does four things, four very important things. First of all, it operates over just a few seconds. This is fairly short term, and it serves as a temporary storage place, meaning that temporary storage of what are the ideas that you are planning to express, and what background knowledge do you already have that you can retrieve from your long-term memory. All of that lives in the working memory temporarily. It focuses your attention so you can manipulate the information that you need to between the new challenge and the skills you need to pull on in order to do it. Working memory is, and one way to think of it is really the problem solving part of the brain, and is very important to learning. So when someone has limited working memory, all of these functions basically kind of contract. So we need to then start to look at breaking things up and breaking things down so that we can achieve one piece of this at a time. So working memory, in order to really function well, there are a bunch of things that need to be automatic, such as handwriting. In particular, and this is especially true for young children who don't have the ability to keyboard yet. Keyboarding, of course, which is important for writing. Spelling, definitely. Without some students are just frozen by the inability to spell something. They just can't get past it. Capitalization and punctuation and general word usage, such as tense agreement and using the right pronouns and so on. All of that stuff needs to be automatic in order to focus on the higher order processes, which is like the meaning, your purpose for writing, who your audience is, how you're going to construct your sentence, what type of sentence, and also the overall just tone and meaning of the piece. That's a lot of stuff that has to be coordinated. Now, technology can help with a number of these things. It certainly can help with a lot of these lower order processes that may not be automatic. To the extent all these things, as automatic as these things can be, is so much to the better, because you can use technology to help you overcome these barriers, but that's not going to help you it's not going to help you with exactly what you say either, your higher order processes. That has to come from you as the writer. So we work hard on teaching handwriting to young children, which I know a lot of public schools don't, but I strongly recommend that they should, because children really can't use keyboarding as a really good support for writing until they're closer to the upper elementary grades. So handwriting also is an important aspect of literacy development. So I think to leave it out, to avoid it, is a mistake. Spelling and goes along with reading, so any of those language-based issues can be remediated, or we have technology workarounds such as spell check and spell predict and voice recognition. And we also have marvelous programs that can help with syntax, punctuation, word usage, and things of that nature. So there are workarounds, but these things have to be in place. And life is easier, of course, if these various skills are more automatic, so you can really have the cognitive working space to focus on these other higher order issues. So really, executive function is executive control coordinates all these sub-processes that have to go on all at the same time in order for writing to be produced. So there's language and cognition, there's memory, there's prioritizing, there's self-regulation, knowing that you have strategies and actually using them. There's motor skills, there's also social cognition, which we'll talk about, and one's own sense of oneself. If, am I able to do this? Because if I don't believe I am, then all these other things are not going to be as effective. So the bottom line is writing is complicated. So for folks who have language-based difficulties, these are some of the things that we see. Poor handwriting, definitely. Definitely. Oftentimes, for those who have some receptive or expressive language difficulties, limited vocabulary will narrow the word choice and make expressive writing more difficult. Spelling, frequent misspellings, especially if the misspellings, if the misspellings don't have clear association with sounds. So if the misspellings basically get the sounds right, but the letters wrong, oftentimes then spell check is more likely to get it. But without that, it can be just very frustrating. Poor paragraphing, in other words, not having paragraph structure, not having good paragraph structure, and not really knowing how to structure a paragraph makes the writing less understandable. And then we have sentence errors, fragments, run-ons, syntax that's garbled, no verbs, no subjects. And then generally with unsophisticated ideation, meaning that the topic and of the writing is not particularly well thought out, and it's not very well developed. So these are all functions of language to a certain extent. But then there are also executive function difficulties, such as, some days writing goes really well. Some days it doesn't. A lot of difficulty planning. Thinking about what is this piece of writing going to look like when it's done. So maintaining that sense of, that a topic, unity of a topic, and what the whole is going to express as opposed to individual sentences or paragraph. Lots of time, another executive function error is difficulty narrowing the topic. Because if your topic is too broad, you'll never really get to the meat of what you're trying to say. And then difficulty distinguishing what's important and what's not, because we always have to, what's important needs to be placed in topic sentences, thesis statements, etc. If they're all mixed together, then the reader is going to have a hard time figuring out what is important to the writer. Also, executive function difficulties that come into play are just general disorganization of time and space. Maybe items in the writing are not organized according to chronological order or some order that makes sense to the audience. Then, as always, procrastination, leaving things to the last minute, being so perfectionistic that you can't really finish because it's not perfect, so therefore you don't turn it in, and so on. Knowing the material and being able to verbally express, talk about, know the material, be able to talk about it, but not write about it. And which is a lack of ability to turn thoughts into written expression, which we see a lot of. And that doesn't come from having a language-based learning difference like dyslexia or dysgraphia. That's an executive function issue. And then, of course, there are accidental errors in spelling and mechanics and syntax that won't have a pattern. There'll be an error that in spelling one way and but other times it's spelled correctly. It's very, it's very sort of garbled. So the barriers to writing then success tend to be organizational skills, which are really crucial. Planning is a crucial part, probably, it's hard to sort out, but an absolutely foundational piece of writing is being able to organize and plan. Another is being able to see another's point of view or empathy. And this is important because it's social cognition. In other words, having a sense of your audience, because writing is a communication tool and we are generally writing for others, which is important. So it's important for teachers to give assignments to students other than just writing in their journal, which is really journals are for themselves. Expressing thoughts in writing for somebody else to read requires thinking about your audience and recognizing that they don't know everything you do, so you have to explain what you're talking about so they can understand it. Then telling the difference between what's important and what's not. World knowledge, background knowledge is really important to support, to create a statement, a holistic point of view and so on. And the ability to sustain effort and attention, to focus and carry through with that focus. And the other part is having syntax and grammar skills that are to enable you to manipulate words in sentences, paragraphs, and essays. So at this point, I'm going to ask Joanna, do we have any questions here or any comments?
Not yet. So if anybody has questions, please put them in the Q&A or the chat function.
Sure, very good. Okay, so this is all, we know what the barriers are. So what does research tell us about what good writing instruction should be? Well, there's a researcher, Stephen Graham, who has who has done quite a lot of research with his partner, Karen Harris. And a lot of this is, he's written many journal articles and books. A lot of what we're talking about here comes from a volume that he edited, that he has articles and edited articles called Best Practices in Writing Instruction, second edition. So he's done a meta-analysis of all kinds of studies of what works in writing instruction. What he's found is that summary writing has a high correlation with reading comprehension. So being able to summarize a piece of reading, a text passage, for example, is an important ability as far as showing that the student understood the passage. And we struggle with teaching reading comprehension and how to get students to understand. Summarizing is very important as a strategy or as a skill toward that end. The other thing that's interesting from this is that teaching grammar, meaning for example, diagramming sentences, which I used to love to do when I was in the 8th grade. Maybe you're going to be a writing teacher if you love sentence diagramming, because you don't really need it either. Teaching grammar has a slightly negative effect on reading comprehension. So if you're planning to teach writing where you're just thinking about, subject, verbs, modifiers, and where they all go, you're not probably thinking about the meaning of what you're reading. And this is an interesting, this has turned writing on its, on writing instruction sort of on its head, because everybody is used to referring to subjects and verbs and prepositional phrases and conjunctions and so on. But the truth is, you really don't, that's not the most important part of teaching writing. So we'll talk about what is. So what is writing exactly? Well, first of all, it's a transcription process. It's a cultural tool that humans have developed to create a code for their oral language, basically. So we talk about reading as breaking the code, and writing is essentially being able to transcribe oral language into a code that people can read. So it's it's a form of writing things down. It's a demonstration of knowledge. It's very much a communication tool. Writing initially was probably developed as a way of maybe of keeping track of things that were bought and sold for commerce initially. And then it's a learning tool, because we know that when you can write about something you've read, that you are essentially making meaning out of what you've read, or writing is making meaning out of what you're thinking. And that is all about learning. So, and I think it's interesting to note too, that writing is much, much, much younger, developed much later than oral language. Well, actually, reading and writing developed much, much later than oral language did. Oral language, we evolved for oral language, and by and large, it develops without, as a natural developmental process. As long as children are around other people who are talking, they will be able to learn to speak that language. Humans have been talking in some form for thousands and thousands, 20,000, 40,000, who knows how long. Writing and reading maybe 5,000 years ago, when there was the beginning of creating some sort of a some symbols that could be read, which of course didn't really take off for a lot of people until the Greeks invented their alphabet, which we still use today. So when the Greeks invented their alphabet, writing began to take off. And here's the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is sometimes called the nation's report card. Here's what they said writing is, and this is 10 years old, but writing is a complex, multifaceted, and purposeful act of communication that's accomplished in a variety of environments under various constraints of time, with a variety of language, resources, and technological tools. Technology, of course, is crucial to writing because you have to use some sort of technological tool to write the code that people will read. And so to write, you need some kind, it might be a very low-tech tool like a pencil or a piece of charcoal, or it might be a very high-tech tool such as using a word processor. But the thing about writing that makes it so important for learning is that, you use it to explain or tell about your knowledge, but as you do it, you are making meaning and you are transforming that knowledge into something that is special or internal to you. So as we read, we take what the writer is, the information the writer is expressing or telling us, and we transform it to make it our own. And that is one of the key pieces of learning. So writing really is the way that cognition and language merge. Cognition and language actually develop on somewhat different tracks. So that for writing, you have to have some linguistic knowledge, oral language, and then the ability to transfer oral language into whatever code your language uses. It's also requires some world knowledge that comes from just living in the world, reading about things, etc. And social cognition, which means writers have to think about their audience. Who are you writing this for? Who's going to read it? What does that mean about what I have to tell my audience? And so, one of the things that is to think about, for teachers to think about, is, what kind of assignments are you giving? Journal writing is very common and it's fine, but if that's the main source of writing assignments, then one ought to think about some others in addition. Writing for a school newspaper, that requires writing for an audience. Writing letters to people, whether they're imaginary or real. Writing summaries. Imagine you're telling about this, you're summarizing this for people who don't know. Writing a review of something, even giving a PowerPoint presentation such as this one. I have to think about my audience and explain what I think is important that will be useful to the audience. So we get better outcomes if we can, for writing, if we can, first of all, raise the linguistic complexity and clarity of sentences. Sentences are the bedrock of writing. And so we need to pay very close attention to them so that when they go into paragraphs and essays, they will make it more informative and be more expressive of what thoughts are. So we need to improve organizational skills, so support students in how they organize their writing. To write about reading is to improve reading comprehension, because you have to understand what you've read if you're going to write about it. It can also improve study skills. And it's important to embed writing in all areas of instruction, not just English language arts classes. We are all reading and writing teachers these days. And so we'll talk a little bit about sentences. And this, what I'm going to show you comes from the work of Judith Hockman, who developed a system of teaching writing at the Windward School, which is a school in New York that in White Plains and also in Manhattan, that uses that was developed for students who have various learning difficulties, learning challenges, such as executive function and language-based learning challenges. And a school very much like Groves Academy is, but it is bigger. So she has a book called The Writing Revolution, which is available for between $20 and $25 on Amazon, probably other places too. And I strongly recommend it for anybody who's interested in improving writing instruction. So why should we focus on sentences? Well, we need to raise the linguistic complexity and clarity of sentences, first of all. And so we want students to write better sentences that are more informative and will be more expressive. We also need to enhance revision and editing skills. So the work isn't done when the sentence is finished. The work is only done when revision and editing proofreading and also revision. How can we express this better are done. The other goal is to improve reading comprehension. So we're not going to write sentences in a vacuum. We're going to base our sentence writing instruction off of material that we've read. So what I like to, what I like to think of this is this mode of instruction is really a reader-oriented writing instruction program, using reading and by doing this, enhancing reading comprehension, and I'll show you how. So there are a number of sentence strategies that that we can teach for improving sentences. The first of which is teaching students to recognize fragments versus complete sentences, okay, and which we'll talk about. We also want them to be aware that there are 4 sentence types, that they don't have to write everything as a statement. They can include questions, exclamations, commands, depending upon what's appropriate for what they're writing. Then we want to teach some basic coordinating conjunctions. And this may be my favorite strategy, well, at least one of them anyway, out of all of the strategies in the writing revolution, because, but, so. To teach students, this is critical thinking at the sentence level, and I'll show you how that works. Subordinating conjunctions make using starting sentences with subordinating conjunctions often makes a much more interesting sentence, and certainly a more sophisticated one. Positives, which I'm not going to cover much today, but those are always, you can always use a good appositive. Combining sentences, very powerful strategy. And expanding sentences with question words, which is a great way to teach sentence expansion. And let's look at how do we do this? Well, you don't have to use the phrases, nouns, verbs, predicates, prepositions, adverbial clause, etc. For young children, and I would say for many of us, just talking about who did what for a noun and verb sentence pattern, using question words to elicit responses, as opposed to saying, well, you could add an adverbial clause here. No, thank you. Or you could add a prepositional phrase here. You can use a question to say where, when, how, to elicit good sentence expansion responses. So then, by building the concepts rather than just the terminology of basic sentence parts, allows students to learn how to expand sentences and how to self-monitor the sentences they hear, speak, and write. So rather than thinking in these complicated terms, and then teachers say, well, but others use the terminology, and I mean, it's like, great, I don't care if you want to teach nouns and verbs and so on, and the terminology for that, that's fine. I mean, but you don't have to do it, at least initially. And once the concept is developed, who or what did what, where and when, then you can maybe introduce some alternative terminology for those functions. But the main thing is to establish those functions in the sentence, very important. So we practice fragments because it'll help students know what is or not a sentence. And it helps you to label the who or what in a sentence. So, and it helps to understand what who or what is doing. So in other words, if we have the chirping birds, okay, then I could say the chirping bird did what? What did they do? Oh, the chirping birds flew. Where? From one tree to the other. Great. or shuts the lid. Who shut the lid? Walked. Who walked? A box of shells did what? You know, what did the box of shells, what was the action? So you can easily pull fragments from a book or an article that students have read, and that provides a contrast between a fragment and a complete sentence. It also checks for comprehension. If they can repair the fragment using knowledge that they've learned from whatever book they've been reading, that is another way of reinforcing comprehension. So the other thing we want to do too early on is practice sentence types, because we need to vary our sentence. If every sentence is a statement, a short statement, the writing is going to be boring and choppy and not very interesting. And the audience is not going to learn as much as they could if you are able to write something a little more interesting. This is also helpful because we're going to be teaching paragraphs structure. And when you write a topic sentence, you probably want to make it somewhat interesting to draw in your reader, your audience. So if you look at the 4 sentences below, each one is a different sentence type. You know, there's the statement at the beginning, there's an exclamation, there's a question, and there's this command. I would say the statement is probably the least interesting of any of these sentences. So that's probably not what you want to start your paragraph with. Maybe you want to end your paragraph with, as a concluding sentence, it's a statement. But beginning, you know, these are good lead-ins to information you want to give about Thanksgiving. So the 4 sentence types are statements, questions, exclamations, and commands. And kids pick this up very quickly. You don't have to spend very long on this. But you do have to develop how to write a question, you know, how to write a command or whatever. Questions especially are a more complicated sentence type than really most of the others. And so you can also develop writing activities based on things that I've read. Like suppose you've read an article about immigration, maybe the history of immigration or something. And then you give key phrases from that article and ask students to write a question using these terms, or a statement or an exclamation. That's a wonderful way to practice, pretty straightforward, based on reading. It's a win-win all the way around. So tests for, you know, it's a way to assess content knowledge. It's also a way to practice writing different sentence types. Another thing that I love to do, and this is a great way to introduce, introductory activities to any kind of a unit, is to show a picture and maybe give an answer and ask the student to write a question, or just ask the student to write a question that relates to the picture. That, when you can write a question about anything, you're already setting the stage for learning more about whatever topic you are doing. And here's another one. Again, here's cave art, and all kinds of questions, ask students to come up with, they can answer questions, but they also can create questions, which is based on the picture. And that's nice because it's a nice way to involve the right brain in looking at the picture with the left brain, who has to come up with the language for the question. And again, here's another great way of assessing content knowledge. Write a question that has the answer of George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or 1600. So, what would the question be? Clearly, who was the first president? Second, who was president during the Civil War? What is the address of the White House? All of these things. These are, obviously for younger kids, but it's a great activity and draws in content knowledge. Now, this is my, and maybe I should stop here. Joanna, do we have any questions so far before I launch into because, but, so?
Nope, no questions at this time.
Wow, okay, great. So this is the because, but, so strategy, and this is really one of my favorites. This is a way to teach basic conjunctions, and as you group them, you can, it forces students to think about because tells why something happened, but forces students to think about a change of direction. Something is true, but we have to think of something else that may not be true. So is great for asking for cause and effect. So let me show you how this works. Basic conjunctions is the simplest way to expand a sentence, and it does give more information to the reader than the simple sentence, but most particularly it helps us think about a reason for something, a direction, change of direction, or an effect of an idea. So here's some examples. So if we take but, okay, this is change of direction. Wilbur, this is from E.B. White's wonderful book, Charlotte's Web. Wilbur was doomed to death, but Fern saved him. So he was going to die, change of direction, but Fern saved him. Now, there are other more complicated ways to introduce a change of direction into sentences, but is the beginning part of that. So, as students develop, you can certainly introduce other ways to introduce a change of direction, but is the first good way. So what we want to do then is to teach this is to create a sentence kernel, one that could stand on its own, but would be better if we had some explanation. So the first one, the teacher was happy, and then the student has to complete the sentence 3 times using because, but, so. So this could be something like, the teacher was happy because she loved her students. The teacher was happy, comma, but she didn't like wearing masks in school. Who does, really? Anyway, the teacher was happy, so she continued so she kept her position as a teacher in the school, or something like that. Oops. Sorry. Okay, then we get to, and then again, Thanksgiving is an important holiday because families gather around the table and share and give thanks. Thanksgiving is an important holiday, but not all Americans celebrate it. Thanksgiving is an important holiday, so we take time out to make it special, or something like that. So you can see that it goes from very simple all the way to American history. Alexander Hamilton is admired because he created the National Bank, or because he was one of our nation's founders. Alexander is admired, but he was criticized by some of his peers or whatever. Alexander Hamilton is admired, so we put him on our money. Anyway, these are all, and so it really, really, really just causes, really causes students to have to really think about in more advanced, more analytical thinking than they otherwise would.
Ellen, we did have
Yes.
a question come in about this.
Good.
So from Kate, it says, these are wonderful exercises. How important is it for students to handwrite their answers? Can we use narration instead?
You mean to work as a scribe? Well, I mean, it depends on the student, because we're always making accommodations for students. I think it is important for students to learn to write if they can. Narration is, I'm not going to, there's some value in that, definitely. But I think what we want to do is to create a way for students to actually write that allows them to be independent. Now, I mean, that question is loaded because I'm not sure what you're talking about. I certainly think that you can do this exercise with young children in a group, and you can do it orally. You can also and have the teacher write, and so on. The teacher can write, the students could copy. There are levels to lead up to independence. As students get older, if handwriting and keyboarding are just not successful, there certainly is voice recognition. But it's important to remember that oral language is different from written language. And one of the things we're doing here in this program is teaching students writing conventions to a certain extent. And really, when we speak, we use somewhat telegraphic expressions and so on, whereas in writing, we express things in ways that we wouldn't in regular oral language. So I think this is, as a thinking exercise, it's okay to do scribing, but I would be careful that it is not the only way ultimately that students do this exercise. Now, if you're starting this with a group of students, sure, you're probably going to model it, and they're going to maybe give you answers that you're going to write, and that's fine. You should do that. But I always look at the gradual release of responsibility where I'm modeling, and then we do. So then the student gets an opportunity to do it, and we support, and with a lot of support. And maybe that goes on for quite a while, and eventually we want to develop some independence. So, there's nothing wrong with scribing, and in certain instances, it's probably what you want to do, but you want to make sure that you are moving toward some level of independence. I guess that's what I'd say. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then do you have a typing or keyboarding program that you would recommend?
Well, it depends on who's learning it. I mean, if you're going to learn the home row approach, we use at Groves, we use a program called Typing Pal, which tracks the students' progress and gives them appropriate typing exercises for where they've been before. I really do like to use there is a method of teaching typing that's an alphabetic method, and that was developed, and the name is tip of my tongue, and I probably have it sitting over on my shelf, but nonetheless, there's no typing program for that, but it is a program that you could do with students, and I've had a lot of success with that. So where you basically start with the alphabet. For students for some students with language-based learning challenges, that's easier to remember than the home row, because it's based on something. It helps them remember kind of, motorically where things are on the keyboard. If you Google alphabetic typing program, it'll probably come up. Or, I can see it sitting on my shelf here, but I'll refrain from getting up and leaving the workshop to find it. So anyway, happy to let you know and give you a reference. Okay, anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, wonderful. Again, some examples. Columbus wanted to find a new route to the Indies, but because he wanted a shorter route for trading with Asia, but he ran into the Americas, so he he got 3 ships to go and discover and to to find this course to the Indies. So it's got all kinds of applications, including math. And you can do math writing in math. And that's a good idea. So, and more in math. I have a lot of math examples because math teachers oftentimes don't really think that they should be teaching writing and reading, but really they should. Okay, you can use it for vocabulary too. So as students get are further along, they can use the vocabulary word along with because, but, and so, and that is a BOGO if there ever was one. Using the vocabulary and critical thinking all at the same time. Now, sentence combining, and I'm going to plow through some of this really quickly because I want to get to paragraphing, of course. Sentence combining is a great strategy and is as an effective writing instruction technique strategy, it is very high up there. And so we want to practice, have students combining nouns, combining verbs so that into one sentence. And then sentence expansion, which is different from sentence combining because here we're going to use question words. Helps us, again, give more information to the reader. Helps us to write like writers, summarize, revise. Question words are really useful. So the way you do this is, again, starting with a simple declarative sentence, only one verb, no modifiers, no conjunctions, so on, and then give question words. Sentence, snow fell, when, where, how, so on. It snowed, when, Saturday, where, in Edina. Now, if I were going to ask a question about snow and say snow, I'd say, or answer it, if somebody said, where did it snow? I'd probably say, when did it, so where did it snow? It snowed in Edina on Saturday. But for written language, and here's where we're talking about more writerly writing, we want to put a when. Saturday, it snowed in Edina. Or in Edina, it snowed on Saturday. Starting sentences with when or where will get you far more points on big standardized tests, things that are measuring writing ability. So I just teach students, all right, if you're going to start the sentence, start with when or where. So those are the two expanders that I'm going to start with pretty much any age student for sentence expansion. And then I'm gradually going to add why and because and why, how, and again, by whom, when, where, why, and so on. So you can add up to 5 modifiers here in a sentence, maybe even 6 if you use all of your question words. And here we see when. In 1863, who? Abraham Lincoln issued what? The Emancipation Proclamation. Where? In Washington, D.C. Why? To free the slaves. So there you go. What a great sentence. One way you can teach this is by putting a pronoun in your sentence kernel. So then the students have to figure out who or what, and and then of course, if we start with a subordinating conjunction, that's even better. People love that. I'm not going to spend too much time here because we want to get to paragraphs. And so paragraphs, the single paragraph outline is a wonderful way to plan a paragraph. And why? Because we need to plan and organize. It helps us to stay on topic. It helps us focus on what's most important and help us think about and remember what we're learning. So planning means you have to select a topic. You have to gather information. You need to outline and organize. You have to inhibit temptations to leave. You have to sustain your task and effort, and you have to, look at your outcome, revise if necessary, and make changes. This is what the single paragraph outline looks like, and it's very easy. Note that we have, name and date. It has lines for topic sentence. When there are complete lines, that means you have to write a complete sentence. So the topic sentence and the concluding sentence are all on solid lines, but the details are all on dotted lines. Now, what that means is on dotted lines, you do not have to write the complete sentence. You can write keywords and phrases, which is the beginning of teaching kids how to take notes. So, and you can oftentimes, what I like to do is to, when planning is start thinking about a topic and think about the audience. Who are you writing this for? What is the purpose of your writing? So those are questions that need to be answered for planning purposes. And then you want to identify what's your focus, what's your topic sentence. Now, teaching topic sentences can be a long, process. So I often like to start with giving a topic sentence, and then having students develop the supporting details. And so what you can do is teach, by teaching topic sentence, you can ask students to identify a topic sentence in a series and or give it in the single paragraph outline that's partially complete, and then students have to finish the quick outline with details. You don't always have to have a concluding sentence. And this is an example. So here you want to, this is an excellent case where ask students, what's most important here? And oftentimes they'll say, well, during the Civil War, Harriet Tubman spied for the Union. Well, what does that have to do with working in the fields? So eventually we come to this general sentence that she was an extraordinary woman. And then we list the supporting details. These kinds of exercises that really break down paragraph structure like this is really important, a really good work to do. You can also ask, one good way to start a topic sentence is by using one of the 4 sentence types. Start your topic sentence with a question or an exclamation. Then using the positives and starting with a subordinating conjunction, that comes along with more sophisticated writers. It's also really good to help students to get used to looking at text structure and thinking about what kind of text am I reading? What kind of text am I writing? Is it just informational text, which is expository? And that is crucial to teach. Narrative, which is really more related to fiction and more related or personal stories, as is description. Persuasion and argumentation are important for expository text, and argumentative may compare and contrast is important, making a case for something. These are all different text structures, and actually the expository informational text tends to put a bigger load on executive function skills. So it's important to give students lots of practice writing expository text because it requires more planning, more organization, more revision, etc. And really requires a lot of focus to be able to complete. Start with a paragraph, but then you can move on to multi-paragraphs. So, of course, you want to teach students how to brainstorm. I think this is fairly common in classrooms, but you want to categorize it. Then you need to think about, how are you going to group and organize these things that you've brainstormed, and then create a topic sentence. It's perfectly fine to start with putting in important details and then come up with your general sentence. And summarizing is one of the crucial pieces of writing that students need to do to support their reading comprehension. And this can be done in any content area class, particularly though in science and social studies, as well as language arts. Summary writing is, and summarizing, even just taking notes that summarize, is really crucial. So you can write a summary of the text, you can write notes about the text, you can respond to a text in writing, or you can answer questions and create and answer questions about a text. All of those have been shown to improve comprehension. These are summarizing activities. This is from Writing to Read, which was a big federally Carnegie study done in 2010 about reading comprehension and writing. So you can do a summary sentence. You can actually just use the single paragraph outline as a way of summarizing without having to go into the whole paragraph thing, or you can use a combined outline. Here's an example of a summary sentence. So here you can set this up and scaffold it for students. You know, this is a sentence, this might be a summary sentence for studying the French Revolution. You know, so who, women, did what? They protested when? 1789 at Versailles, because of the harsh economic conditions and food shortages they faced, and they protested violently. So here we go in our summary sentence. We start with when. In 1789, women protested violently. Where? In Versailles. Why? Because they faced harsh economic conditions. Boom. That very efficient and a really great sentence to boot. And you've scaffolded that. You know, rather than writing an entire paragraph, it's a great way to write a very tight and well-worded summary sentence. Multi-paragraph outlines. Basically, you can gradually move into multi-paragraph essays. You can have a 2 to 3 paragraph, what we call a transition outline. And this works well when you're doing compare and contrast or pros and cons, you know, pros of cell phones, cons of cell phones. And again, each paragraph has a topic sentence, and then they also have notes about what the pros and what the cons are there. And that translates nicely into a short essay. Here we're moving into a longer essay where we need to think about a thesis statement, which is a whole other wonderful world of study, that involve, you know, 3 paragraphs, an introductory paragraph that states a thesis, 3 paragraphs that support it, and then a conclusion, which more or less refrates the thesis statement. And here's an example of a multi-paragraph outline without the thesis and conclusion. And this might actually be something that I might give to my students. And this is, of course, more, you know, certainly higher grade levels, more sophisticated, that has 2 different philosophers there. Women's rights activist describes them with, you know, descriptors, and then the student then might need to write the, you know, the practice planning the thesis and statement and the conclusion statement. And of course, you know, you can make these forms, but and then revising is really important. Editing, you know, editing spelling and grammar, sure, very important, but you want to teach students how to improve what they've written. And the best way to do that is to look at words and look at, can you vary your vocabulary? Do you need to add transitions? Oftentimes, you know, and what's a great way to do that, and this builds independence, is to give students a very brief, unelaborated paragraph and have them give them directions for revising it. So here's an example. Eleanor Roosevelt was important. She was married to Franklin Roosevelt. She was the first lady. She made many contributions. Many people admired her. Great. So now what I might do with that, I might give this to students and say, okay, you need to improve the topic sentence and the concluding sentence. You need to expand the sentences. You need to add a transition, combine sentence, vary your vocabulary. And I would also, in a sentence like this, I would number the sentences and tell them what I want to do, which would be something like this. Okay, so here we have, we've got 6 sentences that supposedly, that's supposed to be a paragraph that does not hang together. So here I would give, this is a highly scaffolded exercise. Improve that topic sentence by answering what. Beneath this hair represents what. Add in a positive for a saw guy. And vary the vocabulary, then answer what and why. Sentence 3, begin with the concluding transition. And sentence 4 and 5, combine by beginning and so on. Sentence 6, answer whom and why, and add a concluding sentence. Very specific, that the student has worked up to should understand what all those things mean, and then do it. Although, of course, I would probably do something simpler than that with beginning writers, but I would still do it. So you can start, of course, you can start by revising revising an elaborated paragraph as a class. Then that's the modeling part. You can put the unelaborated paragraph on the board and let kids suggest things. That's the we do it. Students can work in pairs to follow directions. Eventually, maybe they can work with a peer to improve without directions, and eventually they're independent. It takes a while, but it is the way to make students really independent and use all these terms and understand them and work with them. So for order, what I would do, what I recommend, what we usually start with, and we use this program at Groves in our school, is we start with fragments. Introducing, can you tell the difference between a fragment and a sentence? Sometimes some students do well with scrambled sentences, some not. I tend not to scramble sentences because it can be confusing. Definitely fragments, definitely moving on to sentence types. And then I introduce because, but, so, and we work with these sentence skills for a while. Meanwhile, I can start to introduce the single paragraph outline without yet having done all of my sentence development. I introduce, that we need keywords and symbols, and we can start introducing writing topic sentences with different sentence types. And gradually, as we talk about expanding the types of sentences that we're able to do, then the paragraph development will improve, and so on. And the thing about this program is it really, you use the same strategies, but it really adapts to the content you're using. So you're going to teach sentences versus fragments, no matter, and I would always start, even, in high school, can students actually do this and use fragments and sentences from our content area text? And similarly, different sentence types and so on. So it is a useful program all the way through school. So the Writing Revolution program is based on the fact that students need explicit instruction in writing, beginning in early elementary grades. I know that it's common practice to talk about the writing workshop and how it's important for students to make meaning out of their writing. It's a venue for that. Yes, it is. But if you don't know how to write, how are you going to be able to use writing as a way to make meaning if you have no idea how to construct it? Sentences really are the building blocks of all writing, and they are important. And they can be developed all the way through school. And when you embed writing in the content of your curriculum, it's a powerful teaching tool. The content of the curriculum drives the rigor of the writing activities. So that's where we find our rigor. And grammar is best taught in the context of student writing, not as a separate exercise. And the two most important phases of the writing process are planning and then revising. And that is what we have. So we have a little bit of time for questions. I'm happy to stay on for a little while if anybody has them.
We did have one come in just at the tail end there, and you kind of addressed it a little bit, but when you're talking about the writing revolution and writing instruction, where would you start with like kindergartners and first graders, like the real little kids?
I would start with fragments and sentences. I would start, again, and actually I want to share with you, I want to share my screen with you and show you something that's kind of amazing and may help you. Here is a piece of writing. Now, this is done in September, or actually August. Okay, this is an initial writing assessment, just to write a paragraph about what you did in the summer. So here's what this student, this third grader, wrote in August. Okay, and you can see the teacher's done corrections and things. Now, this student learned fragments versus sentences, different sentence types, paragraph structure, because, but, so, and handwriting instruction. And this is what it looked like by May of the same year. And if you read through that, you find, there it goes. And with a concluding sentence there, talking about, what I like best about the school year is my teachers. Okay. I mean, that's an amazing transformation. And you see that in students who, if you give them the benefit of explicit instruction, they will learn. So hopefully, that I would follow the process. I would not shy away from paragraphs. You're going to do a lot of group activities and so on, but you want to that and so on related to your content. And you may not get to they may not be writing subordinate clauses or using appositives by May, but that's okay. You start where you start and you get where you get based on student, building student competence. All right, anything else?
Right. No, it doesn't look like there are any more questions.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just say for those of you that missed maybe the very beginning of the workshop, we are recording this, so it will be available on our website, and you'll get the link to that in an email tomorrow. And again, if any of you are educators and would like CEU credits for this workshop today, just email me back tomorrow once you receive that email. And oh, it looks like we did have one question just pop in from Amy.
Where can an adult get writing help?
Yeah.
Well, we have tutors in the Learning Center. There are again, a writing teacher can teach an adult or a child. So again, finding tutors who may teach writing. I know in the Learning Center here at Groves, we have some. I've done workshops for some of them, so they know many of them know the writing revolution. And there are other ways to teach it, but this is, of all the years that I've been around, which is getting to be a long time, this is my favorite. And the one I've seen the most success with.
Yeah, and Kathleen is wondering, does Groves teach handwriting in high school?
No, we don't, sadly. You can teach handwriting to any age, but it just takes more time. In high school, we use a lot of assistive technology. Mostly kids are more often using keyboarding in middle school and high school, or sometimes voice recognition.
Well, that looks like all the questions that have come in.
Okay, that's wonderful. Well, thank you very much for attending. I enjoyed it as always, and I hope you find it useful.
All right, thank you, everybody.